My name is Rebecca Salazar. I'm 34 years old, a mother, and a believer since childhood. Until 4 days ago, I lived such an ordinary life that no one would have imagined God would place such a message in my hand. I didn't want to record this, I didn't want to say my name, I didn't want to repeat aloud what I heard when my heart stopped beating, because since I came back, every word feels like a weight on my chest. But Jesus didn't bring me back to silence me, He brought me back to warn. And although many will mock me, although others will say I'm crazy, although some will insult me for addressing topics they'd rather not hear, I know what I saw and I know who I saw. I'm not a pastor, I'm not a prophet, I don't have biblical studies, I don't have a big platform, or a famous church behind me. I'm a simple woman who knew pain, who learned to survive with little, and who always thought that God's great messages came to other people, to people who were more prepared, holier, more important. But I was wrong, because when I woke up after being dead for 17 minutes, I awoke with a command burning within my soul. Don't go to these places before March 20th. That's what He told me. Not as a suggestion, not as a symbolic idea, not as a phrase to be interpreted as one pleases. It was a direct, clear, urgent warning. And when Jesus speaks like that, heaven isn't asking for opinions, it's offering mercy before the blow. I was between life and death when I heard Him. My body remained below, lying on a cold floor, and my soul was taken to a place where there were no lies, where everything was more real than this room, more real than this camera, more real than my own voice. And there I understood something that tore me apart inside. There are people willingly entering places where darkness has already taken hold. There are places many will go to smiling, distracted, preoccupied with their plans, unaware that they are walking towards spiritual doors they shouldn't touch. And I saw pain, I saw confusion, I saw tears, I saw families scarred by decisions made in the wrong places, on the wrong days, under unseen influences, but which nonetheless exist. Jesus showed me that before March 20th, there will still be people who can choose not to go, who can still cancel a trip, who can still choose not to go, who can still obey that inner turmoil they've been ignoring. That's why I'm here, not to convince the arrogant, not to argue with mockers. I'm here for the person who feels a knot in their stomach as they hear this, because deep down they know this warning didn't come by chance. And the most powerful thing about the warning, the most powerful thing, was Jesus's gaze when He told me that many will hear this and still choose to go. Before all this happened, my life was small, simple, and predictable. I wasn't someone people listened to when I spoke. She was just another woman among millions. My name is Rebecca Salazar, I'm 34 years old. I was born in a city where most of the houses are the same, and so are the worries. I grew up in a religious but humble family. One of those families that doesn't talk much about religion during the day, but that every night they kneel before going to sleep because they know that without God the world would be too heavy. My father was a mechanic for most of his life. My mother worked cleaning offices for over 20 years. I grew up seeing tired hands and knees bent in prayer and learned something very early on, that faith doesn't always live in large churches or in famous people. Many times it lives in small kitchens where someone prays silently while the rest of the house sleeps. My adult life was simple. I worked in a small private clinic as a cleaning assistant. I didn't have a college degree, I didn't have influence, I didn't have followers, I had a fair wage to pay a small rent and help my mother a little. On Sundays, we went to church not because it was perfect, but because I needed to breathe. Because when the world weighs too heavily, the only way to keep going is by remembering that God is still watching. I never sought supernatural experiences. In fact, I was always one of those who listened to testimonies and thought that maybe God used others for those things, not someone like me. My faith was quiet. Praying before bed, reading a few verses, asking for protection for my family. Nothing spectacular, nothing that would have made me think that 3 days later I'd be sitting in front of a camera recounting how I'd been dead and how Jesus spoke to me. If someone had told me that a week earlier, I would have smiled respectfully and changed the subject, because the truth is, I myself thought those kinds of stories belong to other lives, other paths. But God has a way of bursting into the lives of ordinary people without asking permission. And when He does, everything that seemed normal ceases to be so. The day my heart stopped began like any other day, without strange signs, without warnings, without knowing that before the sun set again, my life and the lives of many others would be forever marked. That day began like any other. I woke up early, made coffee, sent my mother a good morning text. I checked the weather out the window, as I always do before leaving. Everything was normal, so normal that now I find it hard to believe that a few hours later I would be between life and death. I arrived at the clinic shortly before 8 a.m. It was a small place, 3 consulting rooms, a reception area, a narrow hallway that always smelled of disinfectant and reheated coffee. My job was simple: cleaning rooms, emptying trash cans, mopping the floor. No one expects anything extraordinary to happen while doing such ordinary things. But it was there, while I was cleaning the hallway floor, that I felt the first pain. It wasn't a mild pain, it was as if something were squeezing my chest from the inside, a heavy, unexpected weight. I tried to take deep breaths, thinking that maybe it was anxiety or tiredness, but the pain didn't go away. My left arm began to feel strange, heavy, as if it weren't mine. I put a hand against the wall because the floor seemed to be moving. I remember hearing someone call my name from the reception area. I remember the sound of a door opening, and then everything started as they walked away. The bucket tipped over when I let go of it. Water spilled onto the freshly cleaned floor. I tried to take a step, but my legs wouldn't respond. I fell. It wasn't a slow fall. It was as if someone had flipped a switch inside my body. The hallway ceiling was the last thing I saw clearly. Then the voices began to sound distant, as if they were on the other side of the wall. It was heavy. Someone was yelling for emergency services. Someone was saying they weren't breathing properly. I felt hands touching my shoulder. I felt them moving me, but I couldn't respond anymore. The strange thing is, I didn't feel afraid. I thought I should be afraid. I thought I should be fighting for my breath. But instead, I felt something different, an eerie calm, like when the roar of a storm suddenly dies down. The last physical sensation I remember was the cold of the floor beneath my cheek. After that, everything disappeared. I didn't hear any more voices, I didn't feel any more pain, I didn't feel my body. It was as if someone had switched off the entire world in a single second. And when everything went dark, that's when what I came here to tell you really began. When I opened my eyes again, I thought I was dreaming. I didn't feel my body on the floor, I didn't feel the cold of the floor, I didn't hear the agitated voices from the clinic. The first thing I noticed was the silence, a profound silence, unlike any silence I had ever heard in my life. It wasn't empty, it was a silence filled with presence. I tried to move, and then I saw it. Beneath me lay my body in the hallway where I had been cleaning just minutes before. I saw 2 people kneeling beside it. A nurse was pressing on my chest with quick movements. Another man was holding something to my face. Later I learned it was an oxygen mask. But at that moment, what struck me most was understanding something that took my mind a few seconds to accept. I was standing, and at the same time, my body was on the floor. I remember looking at my hands. They were my hands, but they looked different, clearer, more alive. Every line of my skin seemed to have an indescribable sharpness. It was as if everything was in focus in a way my human eyes had never seen. I looked down again. I saw the overturned bucket. The water splattered across the floor. I heard the sharp click of the defibrillator as they placed it on my chest. But that sound came to me as if from very far away, as if the physical world had become a distant room and I was on the other side of the door. And then the place began to change. It wasn't like walking from one place to another. It was more as if reality itself was transforming before my eyes. The clinic's hallway slowly began to disappear. The walls, the floor, The ceiling lights, everything began to fade like an image being erased. I felt a strange sensation, as if something were lifting me without touching me. It wasn't wind, it wasn't physical movement, it was more as if my spirit were being carried to another place. And as everything around me transformed, a certainty began to grow within me. I wasn't alone. There was a presence nearby. I couldn't see it yet, but I felt it with an intensity that made me understand I was facing something infinitely greater than myself, something holy, something that didn't belong to this world. It was at that moment that I understood my life on Earth had stopped and that what I was about to see would change everything I thought I knew about reality. The presence I felt soon revealed itself. It didn't appear suddenly like a figure entering through a door. It was more. It was like when the light of dawn slowly fills a room until you realize there is no more darkness. I first felt a profound peace, a peace unlike anything I had ever felt on Earth. It wasn't just tranquility. It was as if every part of my soul was being understood at once. Every mistake, every memory, every fear, every prayer I had ever silently offered, everything was laid bare, and yet I felt no shame. I felt I was being fully known and yet was still welcome. When I finally saw him, I understood something I can never fully explain in human words. He wasn't just a figure, he wasn't just a man. There was an authority and a purity about him that made it impossible to mistake who he was. His presence filled the place like the sun fills the sky. And although the light surrounding him was intense, it didn't hurt my eyes. On the contrary, it was as if that light allowed me to see more clearly than ever before. When he looked at me, I felt time stand still. His eyes had a depth that made everything else seem small. I didn't see judgment in them. I didn't see anger. I saw something much stronger. I saw truth, a truth so pure it pierced through every thought within me. When he spoke, it wasn't like hearing a voice from a single point. It was as if his voice was everywhere at once. And the first thing he said was my name, Rebecca. Hearing my name spoken like that broke me inside. It wasn't just a sound, it was as if my entire existence was contained in the way he pronounced it. I understood in that instant that he had always known who I was, that every moment of my life had been seen, every tear, every prayer I thought no one heard. It had all been before him from the beginning. And then he said something that filled my spiritual heart with a weight I still feel right now, as I speak. Rebecca, you must go back. There are people walking toward places they shouldn't be. And if no one warns them now, it will be too late. When I heard those words, I felt something inside me tighten. It wasn't exactly fear, it was the weight of understanding that what I was about to hear wasn't a symbolic story or a general teaching, but a specific warning. Jesus wasn't speaking like someone giving advice. He was speaking like someone who saw what was about to happen. Around me, the place began to transform again. It wasn't movement like on Earth, it was as if reality were opening up, revealing scenes. Suddenly, I saw cities, streets full of people, airports, shopping malls, entertainment venues. I saw people walking, laughing, planning trips, meeting in places that seemed normal to them. But as I watched them, I began to notice something strange. Over some of those places, there was a distinct darkness. It wasn't physical shadow, it was a heavy feeling, as if something invisible were occupying the space. And I understood that Jesus was showing me places where many people would enter thinking everything was fine, places where decisions would be made that would change their lives. Then he spoke again. Don't go to those places before March 20th. When he said that date, the scene changed once more. I saw people ignoring warnings. I saw some feel an unease in their hearts, but decide it was just fear or their imagination. I saw others enter places where violence, chaos, or danger would soon follow. And I also saw something different. I saw people heeding a warning in time, people canceling a trip, people deciding not to attend a certain event, people obeying an inner voice without fully understanding why. And in those scenes, the story changed. Jesus showed me that many tragedies the world calls coincidence or bad luck sometimes happen because someone ignored a spiritual warning. Not always, but often. And then he told me something that still resonates within me. There are moments in history when heaven speaks before something happens, not to create fear, but to give mercy. March 20th is one of those moments. After hearing those words, I thought it would all end there, but it didn't. Jesus made me look again at the scenes unfolding around us. This time I didn't just see places, I saw people. And that's when I understood something that left me speechless. There were two kinds of responses to the same warning. I saw people listening to a stirring within their hearts. It wasn't a loud voice, it wasn't anything dramatic, it was simply that feeling we've all had at some point, that thought that pops up and says something isn't right, that maybe we should wait, that maybe we shouldn't go. But many of them ignored it. They thought it was an exaggeration. They thought God doesn't care about the small details of daily life and they went ahead with their plans. But I also saw other people, ordinary people, people without fame or important positions. They felt that same unease and chose to obey it. They changed their plans, cancelled a trip, decided to stay home. And in each of those decisions, I saw something amazing. The story changed completely. What could have ended in pain ended in protection. Then I understood that the warning wasn't just about physical places. It was about the human heart, about the ability to listen when God is trying to guide you, even in things that seem small. Jesus showed me families who were saved simply because someone said, "I don't know why, but I feel like we shouldn't go." And he showed me other families who ended up in tragedy because someone responded, "Don't be so dramatic, nothing's going to happen." At that moment, I understood that the real danger wasn't the place itself. The real danger was the hardness of the human heart when it chooses to ignore a warning. And when I looked up at him, I sensed sadness in his presence. Not sadness like someone who loses an argument. It was the sadness of a father who sees his children walking towards something that could have been avoided if only they had listened in time. After that, the scenes changed again, but this time what I saw was much bigger than a single city or a single place. It was as if I were seeing the world from above, countries, continents, millions of people living their days unaware of how close they were to life-shattering moments. And I understood something that left me trembling. It wasn't just an isolated event, it was as if many things were aligning at the same time. Jesus showed me how tension was growing in different parts of the world, conflicts between nations, disasters that seemed natural but arrived one after another, people losing security, stability, peace. And in the midst of all that, I saw something that broke my heart. I saw many people were searching for answers everywhere but in God. I saw them placing their complete trust in human systems that could collapse at any moment. I saw them so caught up in their routines that they didn't even notice the signs around them. Then Jesus spoke again. His voice wasn't harsh, but it held an authority that made it impossible to ignore. He said that when certain dates approach in human history, there are times when heaven offers warnings to awaken those who are still willing to listen. Not everyone will listen, not everyone will believe, but there are always some who pay attention, and those few change their ways in time. As I watched those scenes, I realized that the message I was to bring back wasn't just about a specific day. It was about being spiritually awake, about learning to recognize when God is trying to speak before something happens. Because often people wait for enormous signs, visible miracles, audible voices, but what God uses most often is something much quieter, a stirring in the heart, a simple warning, a thought that seems small but can save a life if someone chooses to obey it. After showing me all of that, silence returned for a moment. I felt the place begin to change again, as if something were slowly closing up. It was then that I understood my time there was coming to an end. I didn't want to leave, not because my life on earth was perfect, but because the peace I felt in that place was something I had never experienced. It was such a profound peace that it made all the pain of human life seem distant. But Jesus looked at me again, and in his gaze was a mixture of love and firmness. "Rebecca, you must go back now," he said. "There are people who can still hear. There are decisions that can still be changed, but only if someone speaks up." When she said that, I felt a force pulling me back. It wasn't gentle, it was as if something was dragging me back into a heavier place. The brightness of the place began to fade. The presence that filled everything began to recede. I tried to look one last time, trying to commit every detail to memory, but the scene was quickly disappearing. Suddenly, I felt something I hadn't felt since it all began. Pain, a sharp pain in my chest. The air rushed back into my lungs like fire. I opened my eyes with a start, and the light from the ceiling blinded me for a moment. I heard voices around me. Someone was counting aloud. Another person was telling me to breathe again. It took me a few seconds to understand where I was. The clinic corridor, the cold floor, people leaning over me. And while my body struggled to function again, something inside my mind remained perfectly clear. The scenes didn't disappear. The words I had heard were still there, intact. I understood in that instant that it hadn't been a dream, not a figment of my imagination, it was a real memory. And I also understood that I now had a responsibility I had never sought, but one I couldn't ignore. When I left the hospital, I spent hours in silence, not because I doubted what I had seen, but because I understood the weight of speaking out. I knew that in there. The moment I told this story, some people would laugh. Others would say it was a hallucination caused by lack of oxygen. Some would say I was just seeking attention. I thought about all of that as I walked back home, my chest still aching and my heart beating in a way that felt borrowed. But every time I tried to talk myself out of it, the words I heard came back clearly. There are people who can still hear. And I understood something important. The message I received isn't meant to create panic, it's not meant to make people live in fear, it's meant to remind us of something may have forgotten. God is still speaking. Sometimes he does it in gentle ways, sometimes through warnings that seem small, and often he speaks before something happens so that those who are willing can change their course. If you've heard this story this far, perhaps it wasn't by chance. Perhaps you just needed to remember that the decisions we make, even the simplest ones, can have consequences we don't see at the time. I don't know who is watching this or where in the world you are listening from, but I do know one thing. When God tries to warn you, ignoring it is never a good idea. If something stirs within you upon hearing these words, don't dismiss it too quickly. Sometimes that unease is the simplest way heaven tries to protect us. I am just an ordinary woman who died for a few minutes and returned with a message I didn't expect to deliver. But if this message touched something within you, I want to ask you for something simple. Write in the comments. I am ready if you decide to listen when God warns before it's too late. Your comment could be the signal that awakens someone else who needs to hear this today.